I never thought that my brother, who made me feel small and worthless during my childhood, could destroy my life as an adult. But then, the unthinkable happened. Not only did he take away the happiness I worked so hard to build, but he also left a wound that could never heal. When I was a child, my older brother was the star of my parents' eyes. He was the golden child, praised for everything he did, no matter how insignificant. Meanwhile, I was left in the shadows, enduring endless comparisons. Look at your brother, my mother would say. But it wasn't just the comparisons. My brother used his favoritism to oppress me. The mean jokes, the teasing, and the times he pushed his own mistakes onto me, all of it made my childhood a dark one. I used to think that when I grew up, things would change. I could get away from him, build my own life, and finally leave the painful past behind. After years of hard work, I did. I had a stable job, a small but cozy house, and most importantly, a wife whom I loved more than anything. My wife, Sarah, was the light in my life, or so I thought. But my brother, whom I'd always tried to avoid, found a way to come back. He first appeared at a family party, smiling as if everything was fine between us. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a series of events that would change my life forever. And then, that fateful day came. A phone call. An unbelievable secret. Not only did I lose the person I loved the most, but I also realized that the one who caused this tragedy was none other than the person I once called my brother. My childhood was not a fairy tale, but a battlefield where I was always the loser. In my family, Mark, my older brother, was the brightest one. He was considered by my parents as a perfect gift from God, while I was just a pale shadow standing next to him. All my small achievements were always overshadowed by his brilliance. From a very young age, Mark was taught that he had the right to do anything, regardless of who it affected. Me? I had to learn to give in. If Mark took my toys, I was scolded for not sharing. If Mark made a mistake, I was held responsible for not reminding him. Gradually, I realized that no one in my family was really on my side. My traumatic childhood years left me with a deep sense of injustice and guilt. I not only hated Mark for what he did to me, but also hated myself for not being strong enough to stand up to him. But I always told myself that one day, I would escape my brother's shadow and find my own happiness. When I went to college, it was the first time I felt free. I chose a school as far away from home as possible, determined to start over. And there, I met Sarah. Sarah was the kind of woman anyone would want to be around. Smart, kind, and always optimistic. I was drawn to her lighthearted way of looking at things, so different from the competition and pressure I was used to. We fell in love soon after. Sarah was not just my girlfriend, but my soulmate, the one who made me feel good enough, important enough. She listened to my heartbreaking stories about my childhood, about Mark, and she always told me that I deserved happiness. When we got married, I truly believed that my life had turned a new page, but Mark always had a way of insinuating himself into my life. Even though I tried to cut off contact, he would still show up at family parties, wearing that smug smile of his as if everything was under his control. "You look like a real man now, little brother," he once said at a meeting, his voice dripping with sarcasm. At first, I tried to keep my distance. I didn't want Sarah to get caught up in the conflicts between Mark and me. But Sarah, being friendly, didn't see anything wrong with Mark. She even encouraged me to make up with him. "He's your brother after all," she would say. I tried, or at least pretended. When Mark visited, I tried to act normal. Sarah always greeted him with a big smile, and he responded with extravagant compliments, sometimes to the point of making me feel uncomfortable. But I told myself I was just overthinking it. After all, Mark was my brother, and Sarah was my wife. There was nothing to worry about. But Mark's presence in our lives became more and more frequent. At first, he just stopped by for coffee or a chat. But then he started making excuses to stay longer. A dinner, a project that needed help, or even small repairs around the house. Sarah, not realizing anything was wrong, always appreciated his help. I began to feel uneasy. There were times when I would come home from work and find them chatting intimately. The laughter from the living room would make me pause. Even though I couldn't hear anything specific, feelings of jealousy and suspicion began to creep up on me. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to disrupt the fake harmony we had. Then one day, things started to change. Mark gave Sarah a gift for her birthday, an expensive necklace. I was surprised, even angry, but Sarah just smiled and said it was a nice gesture. I didn't know how to react. All I knew was that the boundaries between my brother and my wife were slowly blurring, and I didn't know what to do to stop it. In the days that followed, I tried to spend more time with Sarah, as if to assert my place, but Mark kept intruding. The surprise invitations, the unannounced appearances, all a reminder that he could intrude into my life at any moment. Sarah still didn't notice the tension inside me. She still treated Mark like a real brother, unaware that his presence made me feel threatened. I wanted to tell her, but I didn't know where to start. And most of all, I was afraid that I would be seen as unreasonably jealous. In the end, I chose to stay silent. I thought that if I ignored it, everything would be fine. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. And then, that fateful day came, when everything I feared the most came true. It all started one afternoon like any other. I had come home earlier than usual because my company had just finished a big project, and I thought it would be a nice surprise to have dinner with Sarah. But when I walked into the house, I didn't hear the usual music or any other sounds. Instead, I noticed something strange. Mark's jacket was hanging on the sofa. A feeling of unease rose in my stomach, but I told myself Mark must have just stopped by to visit. I called out, "Sarah? I'm home." There was no answer. I walked into the living room, and that's when I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. I walked closer, and the sight before me made my heart stop. Mark and Sarah were standing close together. She was showing him how to cook my favorite dish. His hand brushed hers, and instead of pulling away, she just smiled. A smile I thought was reserved for me. I tried to suppress my emotions, walked in, and said casually, "Oh, so Mark is here. Why didn't you tell me so I could prepare?" Sarah was startled, but Mark just smiled as if nothing was wrong. He said, "We're just cooking. You seem so stressed." I didn't say anything else, but I felt like I was on fire. I couldn't concentrate on anything that evening. The little things between them, their eyes, their laughter, the way Mark casually held Sarah's hand when he handed her something, did stabs at me. But I kept quiet, telling myself I was just thinking. In the days that followed, I began to pay more attention. I noticed that Mark came to the house more often, even when I wasn't home. One day, I decided to check Sarah's phone while she was in the shower. What I found shocked me. A series of text messages between her and Mark. Although the content was not explicit, the way they talked to each other, the intimate jokes, the suggestive messages, didn't sound like siblings. I decided to confront Sarah. I held the phone in front of her and asked her directly, "What are you hiding from me?" Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with panic, but then she calmed down. "Nothing, honey. Mark and I were just talking about family. Nothing out of the ordinary." I wanted to believe her, but in my heart, I knew something was wrong. It was a normal day like any other. I went out to buy some groceries, hoping to get home early to have dinner with Sarah. But on the way back, I realized I forgot to buy her favorite cake. I decided to turn around and stop at a small cake shop near the hospital. That's when it all started. As I parked my car on the side of the road, my eyes happened to wander toward the hospital exit. There, I saw Sarah. She was standing with a man, and within seconds, I realized it was Mark. They were laughing and talking, and Mark's eyes, a look I had never seen him give anyone, made me feel uneasy. I didn't know what to do. Why was Sarah here? Why was she with Mark? I decided not to confront her immediately, but instead watched from a distance. When they entered the hospital parking lot, I saw Sarah holding a stack of papers in her hand, and Mark gently placed his hand on her shoulder as if to comfort her. The feeling of worry started to turn into suspicion. I decided to wait until they left, then enter the hospital to find out what was going on. As I entered the hospital, I felt my heart beat faster. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be a reason they were here together. I walked up to the front desk and asked for information. My wife, Sarah, she was just here. I want to know why she's here. The woman at the counter looked at me hesitantly. "I'm sorry, sir, but we cannot give out patient personal information." I was disappointed, but not discouraged. As I walked away, my eyes caught sight of a forgotten file on the waiting table. Sarah's name was printed clearly on the cover. I picked up the file, my hands shaking as I opened it. The first page left me speechless. Patient. Sarah. My last name. Reason for visit? Pregnancy checkup guarantor, Mark, my brother's last name. My heart stopped. I read Mark's name over and over again, trying to figure out what this meant. He was the sponsor? Why? And then it hit me. Sarah was pregnant, but the baby wasn't mine. I stood there for a long moment, feeling like everything around me was spinning. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The brother I had tried to forgive for so many years, and the wife I loved more than anything, had stabbed me in the back. I left the hospital not knowing where I was going. I clutched the file in my hand, filled with anger and pain. All the little suspicions I had had were now confirmed. Mark's frequent visits to the house, the strange glances between them, it all had a reason. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. When I got home, I saw Sarah sitting in the living room. Seeing me, she smiled as if nothing had happened. "You're home early? Did you buy me cake today?" she asked, her tone gentle. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the file on the table in front of her and said, "Explain." Sarah's smile disappeared. She picked up the file, and I saw her hand shaking as she flipped through the pages. I didn't know you found this," she said, her voice trailing off. "Then explain," I repeated, my voice filled with anger I couldn't contain. Sarah was silent for a few seconds, then began to cry. "I don't know what to say. I don't want this to happen. I tried to stop, but I couldn't." "Stop? Stop what? What are you talking about?" I yelled, feeling like I was about to explode. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice choking. "And the baby is Mark's." I felt like I had been stabbed in the heart. I said nothing, just looked at her with eyes full of resentment. "How did you do this?" I asked, my voice cold. "How could you betray me like this? And Mark? He was my brother too. Why would you two do this?" Sarah didn't answer. She just cried, repeating over and over that she didn't mean for things to go this far. I couldn't listen anymore. I left the house, leaving Sarah sitting there, tears streaming down her face. I drove to see Mark. He was home, and when I walked in, he didn't seem surprised. "I know," I said, my voice filled with anger. "Sarah is pregnant, and the baby is yours. What do you have to say about that?" Mark just stood there, unrepentant. "It wasn't my fault," he said. "Sarah and we couldn't control it." His answer made me lose control. I lunged at him, screaming, "Can't control? You ruined my marriage. You betrayed me. How can you say it wasn't your fault?" Mark didn't respond. He just stood there, as if nothing mattered. I didn't go home right after confronting Mark. Instead, I drove aimlessly, trying to calm the anger and pain burning inside me. But no matter where I went, the memory of my conversation with Sarah and Mark kept playing over and over again, like a broken tape. I lost everything. The wife I loved more than life, and the brother I tried to forgive. Both betrayed me in an unforgivable way. When I finally got home, Sarah was sitting on the sofa, her face streaked with tears. She looked at me as if she wanted to say something, but I cut her off before she could open her mouth. "I don't want to hear anymore," I said, my voice colder than I expected. "No apology can make up for what you and Mark did." Sarah tried to reach me, but I backed away. "Please," she said through sobs. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I loved you, but I made a mistake." "Mistake?" I roared. "This is not a mistake. This is a choice. You both chose to stab me in the back, and now you want me to forgive you? Don't even dream about it." Sarah just sat there crying silently, but I didn't feel pity. I felt empty. The next few days passed like a fog. I decided to leave home. I couldn't bear to share a home with the woman who had betrayed me. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town and applied for a leave of absence from work to have time to think. Every day, I wake up feeling hurt and hopeless. My mind is torn by two questions. Why did they do this to me? And what did I do wrong? Friends and family began to notice my absence from meetings. A few called to check on me, but I couldn't say anything. I couldn't take the pity or the empty advice. Then it was my parents' turn to call. When I told them what had happened, they didn't believe me at first. But when they called Mark to confirm, his silence said it all. "How could you let this happen?" My mother screamed into the phone, her voice filled with rage. "Mark is your brother, and Sarah, she is your wife. How did our family get into this situation? That's the problem, I replied. I tried to forgive and keep this family together, but Mark destroyed it all. And you know what? This isn't the first time he's hurt me. I hung up before she could say anything else. For the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have to try to please anyone anymore. A few weeks later, I heard from a friend that Sarah had come to my parents' house, begging them to talk to me. She wanted to save the marriage, to have a chance to fix it, but I couldn't. I agreed to see her one last time, not because I wanted to make amends, but because I needed closure. As we sat across from each other at a cafe, Sarah looked pale and tired. She took my hand, but I pulled it back immediately. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, she began, but I want you to know that I don't want to lose you. The baby, whoever it is, I want you with me. I smiled faintly. Do you think I would accept raising my brother's child? Do you think I could see the child every day and not think about what you two did? Sarah didn't answer. She just bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, I love you. I really do, I said, my voice breaking. But love can't save us from this betrayal. I can't live with you anymore. We're over. I left the cafe, leaving Sarah there in tears. That was the last time I saw her. Was I being too kind to the two people who had ruined my life? From there, I began to focus on healing myself. I started going to therapy to deal with my emotions. I also found solace in writing, recording my thoughts and feelings in a notebook. Every day, I feel a little stronger. Anger gives way to acceptance. I realize that I can't change the past, but I can control how I face the future. As for Mark and Sarah, I heard that they didn't last long. Mark, as usual, continued to live his life without caring about the consequences. As for Sarah, she moved to another city to start over. I don't care anymore, though. My life is mine now, and I'm determined not to let them control any part of it anymore. One morning, I woke up and noticed that the sky seemed bluer. It had been months since I left my old home, since everything in my life had fallen apart. But today, for the first time, I felt like I was ready to start over. Looking in the mirror, I no longer saw the image of a man who had been betrayed. Instead, I saw a man who had learned to deal with his wounds, a man who was made stronger by his emotional scars. I realized that although Mark and Sarah had taken away a significant part of my life, they could not take away me, my worth, my strength, and my ability to heal. I started focusing on things I'd previously ignored. I took time to pursue hobbies I'd forgotten, running, reading, and even trying my hand at photography. Every time I pressed the shutter, I felt like I was capturing a beautiful moment in a life I thought was lost. Therapy continues to be an important part of my journey. With each session, I learned to let go of the anger and focus on rebuilding myself. My therapist said something I will never forget. Forgiveness is not about them. It is about you. Letting go does not mean you forget. It means you no longer let it control you. As for my family, I have chosen to keep a certain distance. My mother has repeatedly begged me to reconcile with Mark, but I have responded with silence. I know that forgiving him may be in the future, but for now, I need distance to heal. Sarah also tried to contact me a few times, sending me letters of apology and wanting to talk, but I didn't respond. I knew that any connection with her would only prolong the pain. I didn't hate her. On the contrary, I hoped that she would find a way to fix her life, but I also knew that she was no longer a part of my life. As time passed, I began to meet new people. Comfortable conversations and genuine smiles gradually returned. Although I was not ready for a new relationship, I felt lighter. I understood that love was not the only thing that defined me. One day, while walking along the beach, I saw a young couple playing with their child. They were laughing and smiling, their eyes filled with happiness. I no longer felt bitter or jealous. Instead, I smiled and said to myself, my happiness will come in my own way. My life isn't perfect, and I don't expect it to be. But I've learned to accept what happened and move forward. My wounds will always be a part of me, but they no longer define me. I closed the notebook I had been writing in for a while, a diary of my journey from pain to recovery. On the last page, I wrote a sentence that I always reminded myself of. We can't choose how we get hurt, but we can choose how we recover. And I chose to pass.